Hello, we are here in London. Today is 17th of November, it's 2012, and we are here to meet with Dr. Sandler, and we are very, very exciting to be here. Thank you a lot for your disponibility. Now, tell us what you want about your life and your story.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk, and I will just tell you a few things. I was born in Geneva from a middle-class family. We were two children, an elder brother and I. And I grew up being very interested in how people think. That's you know, why we do things the way we do it, why we react the way we. All my life, I thought it was very interesting to watch people. And when I became adolescent, I thought that because I had this interest and because I was very keen and interested in children, I've always regretted that my parents did not have more children, so that I wasn't the little one. I thought I would be teacher. And then I realized that the year before I was going to university, that in fact I wasn't interested in the teaching, but I was interested in how children function. So I thought then maybe it's better to go to do a psychology degree. And I was very lucky because it was wartime and Piaget was in Geneva. And at the time in Geneva, the psychology faculty was not very big, and we were located in a different building than the big university, and it gave us a very nice family atmosphere, which was extremely pleasant, and I really very much enjoyed working with Piaget. And he used his students to do research with him. So we were not only given a lot of theoretical project and literature to study, but we really studied also the children in the field, which was wonderful. And after a few years, he asked me to be his assistant, which I very much enjoyed. Of course, his main assistant was a woman called Barbara Inhelder, but afterwards he had a few lesser people. Yeah. And I very much enjoyed his understanding of the child, how the child developed in the course of his life and made sense of the world around him, and how he constructed, in a way, like a scientist, the whys and how of to make sense of his world around him. And I think this notion that we need to make sense of what happens to us, and that sometimes we we make conclusions which are correct, but sometimes they are completely in the domain of imagination. But they nevertheless, if they are good tries, will help us to make sense of the life. After I finished with my degree in psychology, there was a possibility for me either to continue, and I was offered even a job in Germany to do research, but along the line of Piaget, or to go into psychoanalysis. And I felt very tempted to go along, to open a completely new door by going into psychoanalysis. And I met a young woman who became a great friend of mine, who had escaped from Hungary, who was from a family of psychoanalysts. And so with her help, we both went to England, which I had first thought I could do a training in Paris, but then it became clear that England offered more, and that particularly I discovered that there was Anna Freud in London who had opened a clinic and a school training for young women or young men to learn all about child analysis. And so I came to London in 1950 and stayed ever since. So in fact, I've been longer in England than I have been at home in Geneva. The course at the Anna Freud was based on this idea that Freud had, that one should really teach psychoanalysis like a university should teach, and not just as an adjunct to a full-time job. And Anna Freud made this dream true, and at the center we were busy all day. And we did a lot of observation, baby observation, toddler observation. We had a nursery school in the premise of the clinic, and we did a lot of observation of children from the age of 2.5 to 5 when they went to school. And we of course, learned all about psychoanalysis, but also all about the application of psychoanalysis to the outside world. So, for example, in 1950 in England, it was thought that it was a good idea to separate children who went to hospital, even if they were tiny, because they were upset when their parents or mothers were there, they would cry. And if they were left alone, it was much easier. They were very soon quiet and very obedient. And that was thought to be the right thing to do. And Anna Freud fought very much with the help of one of us called James Robertson, and made films to show the distress of the children who were left in hospital to have surgery, usually. And she managed, with these films and with her work, to make sure that visiting was permitted. And nowadays, in England, no child under the age of 6 is accepted without the mother. And it's absolutely clear that the parents can stay overnight and support the children. So there is one example. She has also helped to rewrite the family laws. I mean, she went and worked with lawyers to explain the needs of children in case of divorce, in case of brutality from the parents when the children have to be taken out, how to deal with it, the consequences of violence, and so on. And she had a great influence in the writing of these laws. So she taught also a lot to nurses, to teachers, to parents, and to lawyers and doctors, pediatricians particularly. Now, when I finished the course with Anna Freud, I had found the man I wanted to marry, He had been training at the institute, and he attended also one meeting that we had regularly, which was on Wednesday afternoon, where people from the institute who were interested in child analysis were invited. And so that's where we met, and we married in '57. And then I had my family. I have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. And after my son started nursery school, I went back to have another psychoanalysis, this time with Mrs. Gomroy, that you seem to know. My first analyst was an English lady called Dr. Bonnard. What was very interesting is that the teaching at the Anna Freud Center was, of course, very strictly Freudian. Yeah. Anna Freud was attached to her father, and she taught her father's idea. But Anna Freud was also aware that by doing child analysis, she discovered new things. And so it is important to underline that Anna Freud also created new ideas. And we can see it already in her book on her mechanism of defense, of the mechanism, where she enlarges the thoughts of her father. She doesn't only repeat it. Yeah. But nevertheless, the ambience in the clinic was clearly that we learned a tiny bit about the idea of Winnicott, but not very much, and not at all about Melanie Klein. Now, when I went to the Institute of Psychoanalysis, it was after the war, so after the very famous controversial discussion, which have been translated now in all languages. But the atmosphere in the Institute was still very adversarial. I mean, it wasn't unfrequent that a very strong Kleinian student, let's say, would not want to have anything to do with a Freudian, you know. And the people who were interested in Winnicott were a little bit in between. They had difficulty also. This has changed over the years, I'm glad to say, and I think we are less threatened now by our differences, but more able to get enriched. So in that sense, I think that my work has developed, partly because I have hopefully learned from my mistakes and from my experience, but also because I've been helped by encountering people who saw things differently. And then you learn. You reject certain things. I can't really myself really get very convinced about this very active psychic life that Melanie Klein believes exists in the child under 1 year. I do think that the child under 1 year is developed at a tremendous rate and is very aware of the mother and the people around them. But I think their structures are still so fluid that I think we can only guess at best what is happening in their mind, but I don't think it is really solid enough to create a whole network of fantasies, which Melanie Klein believes. I do think that, however, these first months of life and later the first and second year are enormously important, but more because it has to do with making sense of the world around, the great importance of the relationship with the mother, the father, the sibling, the dog, the home, and how the child manages these things, and how the child's inner creation and fantasies then is able to remain fluid and can change. Now, when I started the institute, I must say rather quickly I gave up the clinical work with children. I found it very difficult to have my own children and then present them with patients in the afternoon. I felt I couldn't do that. But with adult patients, I could see them when they were at school, and when they came home, they had a mum. So I did very... One thing I did when I worked with Anna Freud, which was for me of an enormous interest, we did a very great research on children who were born blind.
Yeah.
No, children who had never seen,
Yeah.
as opposed to children who became blind. And we had a little nursery school for them, and then we had one or two of these children in therapy. And it was quite challenging to understand their inner world. I mean, they couldn't see their mother, they could just hear, they couldn't see us, they could just hear. How did they manage to learn and to develop? And we discovered quite a very important number of things, particularly the enormous importance of the link with the mother and how the child learns to listen and to feel the most delicate interaction between mother and child, and later between therapist and child. I've been very blessed because, of course, my husband was also a psychoanalyst, and for example, just very practically, the importance of transference was much more central in my learning at the Institute of Psychoanalysis, because it was thought by Anna Freud that in children, especially when they are very small, although there is an affection and a relationship to the therapist, the really very important affects remain linked to the mother. So when I went to the institute, I had to learn to listen and watch much more about the transference movement in my adult patient. And this opened the route for me to be equally interested, very sensitive to the relationship that the patients do with us and their fantasies about us and what they imagine we are, and realizing that in fact they don't know us, but they think they do know us, and how to use that to help to the patient, to help me to know what's going on with the patient. It was a very fruitful relationship with my husband. I was the most enthusiastic with clinical work. My husband was more the knowledgeable man who loved to research and to write. We wrote some things together, but of course the majority of his work are his idea and his developing psychoanalysis. Now I'm a training analyst, and for many years, and I've done a lot of teaching, and I give talks. I learned from my husband how nice and how enriching it is to speak abroad. He was invited a great deal in the States, and I had the privilege to go with him and to listen. And I really realized how helpful it is to hear people with different views. And so I've continued to go sometimes to Italy, sometimes to Germany, sometimes to other countries in Europe. I'm now old and I do much less, but I still enjoy my life. I enjoy my family, my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren.
Oh, your grandchildren. Oh,
thank you.
Thank you to you a lot.
Thank you.
Me, myself and I love with you. We all think you're wonderful, we do. Me, myself and I have just one point of view. We're convinced there's no one else like you.